What's up, guys? We are back with another episode of the team projections for the 2020 season. Today, we are focusing on the Detroit Lions. They finished last in the NFC North last year. A lot of it was because their starting quarterback, Matt Stafford, went down with injury halfway through the season. Speaking of Matt Stafford, I projected out his 16-game season. If he plays a full season, I could see him at about 4,200 yards, 64% completion percentage, 28 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. That's a little lower than what his pace was last year. If you paced out the whole last year, it was about 38 touchdowns. So I got him at about 28 touchdowns, but 11 interceptions. I can see them running the ball a little bit more, especially with DeAndre Swift there now. Not too much on the ground, 95 yards rushing, one touchdown, throwing a little touchdown in there for him. So overall, about 330 fantasy points for him using the scoring that I used, 6 touchdowns, 6 point touchdowns, -2 interceptions. They did sign Chase Daniel as a backup for some insurance. They actually gave Chase Daniel a decent amount of money too, so
Yep.
he's not really threatening Matt Stafford's job. But if Stafford does go down, we know who's coming in as a replacement for him, as opposed to some of these other teams. So, any thoughts on the quarterback situation there?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about Matthew Stafford quite a bit already. I'm not quite as high on him as other people, and we talked about this when we did our ranking series a while back. But I mean, I just don't think Matthew Stafford's going to have as much pressure on him as he used to with the Lions. When you think about the Lions being a terrible organization with a terrible defense, I just don't think everything's going to have to be on Matthew Stafford's shoulders anymore. I think their defense is going to be much improved. You know, they took DeAndre Swift, they signed some offensive linemen this offseason. I think they're going to try to be a little more balanced, based on what I've seen. Darrell Bevel's their offensive coordinator. Back when he was with the Seahawks, they like to be much more balanced. So I expect Matthew Stafford to be a borderline QB1, but I'm not as excited as other people about him. I mean, he'll put up his numbers, but I think his upside will be slightly capped just based on the situation he's in.
All right, so moving on to the running back situation. As I mentioned, they got Kerryon Johnson, then they went out and drafted DeAndre Swift in the second round. Swift went into the draft on a lot of people's boards as the top running back. Um, and he ended up slipping to the. I mean, like most running backs do too. There was only one taken in the first round, anyways. But he ended up slipping to the second round, and he wasn't even the second running back taken off the board, was he? I don't believe
Uh,
so. I don't
no.
remember. Um, but regardless, he ended up in a situation that even back at the draft, we were kind of scratching our heads at it, but it does make sense. I mean, they do want to run the ball a little bit more, and that's why Stafford's projections are down a little bit. On Johnson, he hasn't exactly stayed on the field since he's been in the league, so it is if he does play all 16 games, you're probably looking at a 50-50 split. With DeAndre Swift catching a little bit more out of the backfield. If On goes down, then you got DeAndre Swift coming in and giving him a pretty decent run game. So, what's your thoughts on the running back situation? I don't think there's anybody beyond those two that are worth drafting, but those two are definitely worth drafting in any league.
Yeah, their third running back right now is Bo Scarborough, who had some fantasy relevance at the end of last season, scored some touchdowns. I saw some people stream him in their flex, but this season he most likely won't have an opportunity to have a ton of carries. I mean, I love DeAndre Swift. I think he's a legitimate three down back in the NFL. He can pass block. He's a great route runner. He has great hands, very elusive. So I think long term, DeAndre Swift, this is his backfield. And the fact that they drafted him, I just don't think they see Kyrion as a three down workhorse kind of back, and I think DeAndre Swift is. So I think the Lions are going to be in an interesting situation this year because I think if they don't make the playoffs, Matt Patricia is going to get fired. I mean, I think they're at that point with him right now. So I expect him to want to play the most talented players. So I've been on the fence about this. As much as I think it's going to be a 50-50 split, I think Swift's going to get a ton of carries. I don't like where he's going in drafts right now. I've done a few mocks, and he's going in the 5th or 6th round. And man, I have to be really confident in him to be taking him at that spot. A lot of people are taking him as their RB2, and I just, that's not great value for me. If he's your flex, I mean, I'm still not comfortable with it. I go really running back heavy, so if he was my fourth running back, I'm okay with that. If I have to play him on bye weeks, I can kind of sit him on the bench, see if he does take over that backfield. So I love his talent. I don't love where he's going in drafts.
Yeah, we kind of got to see how that backfield is going to shape out. And like I said, as of right now, we are assuming that on is healthy and that he's going to be playing the whole season. So you can't just bank on DeAndre Swift just coming in and taking over that job. But obviously, in dynasty leagues, he's a good play there. He's a good stash. Mentioned it in other episodes about your taxi. I wouldn't put DeAndre Swift on the taxi. I would keep him on your
No.
in your starting, not your starting lineup, but on your starting bench, and then on opportunities where you get to play him, then play him. Moving into the wide receivers, we got Kenny Galladay, he's a top 10, top 12 guy in a lot of people's rankings. You got Marvin Jones, who had a lot of chemistry with Matt Stafford. He actually had more chemistry with Matt Stafford than Kenny Galladay did last year before Stafford went down. Danny Amendola is there for his second year after coming over from Miami and previously New England. And then they went out and got Geronimo Allison from Green Bay this year. I don't know if that's a move that they just want to get into the playbook of Green Bay or if they're actually going to use him. He's kind of a not really a Danny Amendola type player, but it's going to be one of those two on the field. It's not really going to. He's not going to be replacing Marvin Jones or Kenny Galladay, so it's between those two really. A deeper stash that I like and not really fancy relevant this year is Quintez Cephas was their fifth round pick in the draft this year. So if you got taxi squad or anything like that, then he's definitely a guy that I would look into. Other than that, no other wide receivers that I'm really targeting. Kenny Galladay, like I said, he's your top guy. Danny Amendola, you could probably get undrafted. Allison, undrafted. He's kind of going under the radar. It's like a lot of people forgot that Allison was there, but Galladay and Jones are your top guys, and then Quintez Cephas is a guy in Dynasty that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I love Kenny Galladay. I have him ranked as my sixth wide receiver off the board. I think he's my underdog candidate to finish as the wide receiver one this year. There's always an underdog. Very rarely is the consensus right. So if I had to pick an underdog to finish as the number one wide receiver overall, it's Kenny Galladay for me. And you already mentioned Marvin Jones and Matthew Stafford have a fantastic chemistry. Marvin Jones in the first 10 games of last season was a top 10 wide receiver. He was number 10 with Matthew Stafford. So he's currently going around wide receiver 40. I mean, that's fantastic value, because I'm not assuming Matthew Stafford's going to be injured. I mean, as of right now, he's healthy and ready to go. So Marvin Jones is fantastic value in drafts right now. And as the week started to progress, Matthew Stafford and Kelly Galladay did start to build a rapport. Not as strong as Marvin Jones and Stafford, but Kenny Galladay was still a top 10 guy with Matthew Stafford as well. You already mentioned Cephas. That's another name. I agree with you. Danny Amendola, Geronimo Allison, they're not going to be there long term. And actually, Marvin Jones is a free agent after this season. So theoretically, all three of those guys could be gone, and you could see Cephas potentially step into a number two wide receiver role. Will they probably sign or draft somebody else? Potentially, but if you can stash them in your taxi squad, it's a low risk, high reward kind of move.
I like it. I like it a lot. Going into the tight ends, they got second year tight end TJ Hawkinson. They went out and signed Jesse James. So a solid pair of tight ends there for Matt Stafford to throw it to. He does like to chuck the ball downfield a lot too, but he's notoriously he's like to use his tight ends a little bit more than a lot of other quarterbacks. TJ Hawkinson, I think, is the guy here. He's the play here, even though Jesse James came over and he's got some money from them. But in two tight end sets, I mean, they're both going to be on the field. I think that T.J. Hawkinson is the alpha there, and he's a guy that I haven't really seen Jesse James be drafted a lot or at all in any of the mocks that we've done. But Hawkinson is going. Him and Fant are really going around the same area. What are your thoughts on the tight end situation?
Yeah, I mean, Jesse James, I think, is going to be there more as a pass blocker. I mean, we've seen him catch the ball a little bit in Pittsburgh, but I think he's primarily going to be used as a pass blocker in Detroit. TJ Hawkinson, I mean, he has all the ability in the world, but it's just a matter if he can put it all together. He struggled to get open last season. He had that huge first game and everybody got really excited, but rookie tight ends tend to struggle a ton, so I'm not overly concerned with it. He slowly moved up draft boards, which is a little disappointing to me. I was hoping that he would slip a little more because I love his talent. It's just a matter if he can put together a full season and be more consistent.
All right, so definitely a situation that I not really somebody that targets tight end early. So Hawkinson is a guy that might be on my radar because I could get him a little later. I mean, he's still going a little earlier than other tight ends, but you could definitely get him a little later than your Kelseys and your Kittles and Darren Wallers and stuff like that. Going on to the kicking, they got Matt Prater, who's really consistent. He's got one of the stronger legs in the league. They play in a dome. Um, Out of the NFC North, them and Minnesota play in the dome, so he's got at least 9 games in a dome. I don't have the rest of the schedule in front of me, so if they go to Atlanta or go to New Orleans, it's a couple more games, but at least 9 are in the dome between Minnesota and then the 8 in Detroit. He's for me personally, he's been pretty much my first or second kicker off the board. I mean, people tend to reach on Justin Tucker out of Baltimore, so I let Matt Prater just come to me. As soon as Tucker goes, I'm kind of looking at Prater, and I'm in a lot of leagues where kickers are taken 13th, 14th, 15th round, so it's not like I'm
Gross.
taking it's not like I'm going out and taking Prater in the 8th round because Tucker goes in the 8th.
Yep.
If Tucker goes and I'm one of the next couple picks, I'm taking Matt Prater.
Yep, and I agree with you. I tend to target kickers that play in domes. That's at least 8 games, every season where they don't have to worry about weather conditions, and he kicks for a team that has a nice offense. I love kickers in the NFC South personally because you have lots of domes and lots of great weather conditions. I mean, two of the teams in the North here do play in domes, but you still have the Bears and Packers who can have some unfavorable conditions. So Prater is definitely in the top 5, though, just based on, he's accurate. He has a big leg. He's known to kick 55 plus yard field goals, which gets you some extra points. So, yeah, he's definitely a top 5 kicker.
I haven't heard of any kicking discrepancies in Chicago, but we'll talk about that in another episode. Going on to the defense, I think they're starting to put together a very solid defense overall. They got a couple players that I would definitely target in IDP leagues. They just got Jamie Collins from New England. Their first round pick, third overall, was Jeff Okuda, and I've been on a couple episodes saying that I really don't like defensive backs as far as your IDPs because if you got somebody like a cornerback and they end up being as good as what they're advertised to be, they're not getting targeted, so they're not getting stats, so they're not really relevant to fantasy. He might be good as far as like for Detroit and helping them win games or shutting down other teams' wide receiver ones, but this is a fantasy show and that's not what we want. We want him to be targeted. We want him to get the interceptions and the tackles. But in leagues where it's split up between DL, LB, and then your secondary, Okuda is a guy that I might target. I do like the younger guys. I like guys with a lot of potential, and he was one of the best cornerbacks coming out of college, so I like him there. I already mentioned Jamie Collins, Julian Okora. He was their third round pick. He's kind of got a crowded line in front of him. He plays behind Trey Flowers, and but I could see him. I could see him coming in there and getting to the quarterback. He did that a lot in college. Gerard Davis, a middle linebacker that they got. He's been quietly coming up, and he's been a really good under the radar linebacker for them. He's a first round pick back in 2017. So linebackers are where you get all your fantasy points from. So they got some names overall as a for IDPs that you want to target.
Yeah, and I'll touch up. You pretty much covered everything. But yeah, I agree with you on Okuda. I mean, if he's doing his job the ball shouldn't be coming in his direction. So, and I think from day one, he's going to be a star. I mean, he has everything you need to be a shutdown corner, and I think he's ready to do it on day one. And that's really important for Matt Patricia's defense. And I already mentioned, I think this is a big year for Matt Patricia. Trey Flowers, you kind of mentioned briefly, but he's been very consistent. Over the course of his career, he's had 7 sacks, 6.5, 7.5, 7. So, he hasn't really shown that upside. If he can take that next step, he's an interesting name for me. Gerard Davis is probably my number one target on this defense. I think he's most likely going to lead the team in tackles. He's their starting middle linebacker. Jamie Collins plays more on the outside. I love Jamie Collins. I've taken him already in a few IDP drafts because he's kind of unique. He can get you 100 tackles, but he's also a guy that gets you 7 sacks. He's been known to force fumbles. He usually has around 3, 4, 5 a season, which is pretty consistently over the course of his career as well, which is really impressive. So and he keeps going really late. I've taken him around linebacker 25 a few times in leagues that I've been in, and I think that's really nice value for him. And Gerard Davis is more of a stash for me. He's not even going drafted in a lot of IDP leagues unless you're in a really deep one.
All right. So my final thoughts on the Lions this year. I actually have them as the seventh wild card or the third wild card, seventh team in the playoffs. I've been calling it all summer long. I like the moves that they've made. It's 100% contingent on Matt Stafford playing the whole season, and obviously, I mean that's going to be the case for any of my sleeper picks or anything like that. It's the starting quarterback has to play the whole season. But I like the moves that they made. I don't think Chicago is quite there yet. I mean, their quarterbacking is going to be questionable. Their offense is going to be questionable. Their defense is still up there, but I think that Detroit has enough to overcome them. And then Minnesota lost a few key pieces on defense, and they lost Stephon Diggs. So I can see them taking kind of a step back. Green Bay winning the division. Detroit coming in second at about 9-7, 10-6, and ended up as the seventh team, the third wild card that they added this year.
Yep, and I agree. I think they can finish second in this division. I still have the Packers on top. I think they're going to be hard to bring down right now in that division. The Vikings, they're interesting. They've lost a lot of pieces, but for me personally, Mike Zimmer is another one of those coaches. He's he's one of the best head coaches in the league. I'd say top 10. And I think he's very underrated in that regard. So I think he's going to keep the Vikings competitive. A lot of people have them slipping way down. I have more faith in Mike Zimmer than that. The Bears, I think, could potentially be a mess. I know people keep saying their defense will keep them in games, but I think the Bears could be an absolute mess this season. And they're one of my underdog picks to have the number one overall pick next year because I could really see it falling apart. But yeah, overall, I think this is a big year for Matt Patricia. I think this is going to prove if he's a head coach or just a really strong defensive coordinator. So I think it's a really intriguing season for him. I personally would also have them second, right around the same record as the Vikings, 9-7 for both of them.
All right. So until next episode, we'll see you guys again.